Hey friends, it's Joel Richardson, and I wanted to make just a real quick video about my tours and some of the upcoming tours that I have to the real Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. So some of you may have landed on this video simply because you subscribe to our regular Bible teaching that we put out either on my YouTube channel, Joel Richardson Ministries, or FAI Studios, or on the FAI Studios app. Others of you may have seen my part in the recent film, Patterns of Evidence, Journey to Mount Sinai, put out by Tim Mahoney. And others of you may even just have come here because you read the recent article that was on the front page of the New York Times about my tours to Saudi Arabia. So very briefly, I just want to say I do have at least 2 tours coming up if you're interested, okay? The first one is October 5th through the 11th, 2023. Okay, the second is in April 2024. That's April 9th through the 17th. And there's a potential tour, a potential cruise. It's a cruise and a tour. And that's actually sort of been on the books for a few years. We had to postpone it because of COVID, but you'll see that advertised. So if you're interested in one of these tours, you want to get more information, go to the tour company that I work with. It's livingpassages.com. And just send them your information. They'll send you, they'll respond to you and, sort of give you all the information, answer any questions that you might have. So 2 tours coming up at least. Listen, my plan, by the grace of God, is to continue to go to Saudi Arabia every spring, every fall. Obviously, you don't want to go there in the summer. It gets too hot. But by the grace of God, this has been one of the most genuinely amazing blessings in my life to be able to go to Saudi Arabia at a time in history when it's just opened for the first time to tourism, and particularly to go to the real Mount Sinai. Now, I'm going to do a very brief, abbreviated explanation in terms of why I believe it's the real Mount Sinai. So if you did read the most recent New York Times article, it actually says, these evangelicals are coming because they believe this is the real Mount Sinai. And then it says mainstream biblical scholars vigorously debate this. Now, of course, scholars debate everything, but my point is that statement in the article, it's a little bit misleading because it gives the impression that across the boards, all mainstream biblical scholars reject this mountain as the real Mount Sinai, and that is simply absolutely not true. So to be clear, I have gone twice now with the renowned biblical archaeologist from Israel, Eli Shukron. He was very instrumental, in the city of David, in the Pool of Siloam, multiple really profound discoveries in Israel, the Southern Pilgrim Road right now that they're excavating, which is absolutely amazing. And so Eli is a highly renowned biblical archaeologist from Israel with a lot of experience behind his belt. I've actually taken him twice. He's actually going back in the fall with Frank Turek, biblical apologist. And I just want to say something. In no way, shape, or form do I want to speak on behalf of Eli, but the simple fact that he's advertising this trip to Mount Sinai, putting his name on this, that's a significant statement. Second, I'll just say this. On our first trip, I just wanted Eli to see it. I didn't try to sell him on anything. I just said, let the mountain itself sell itself, which it does. It's skeptics that go there, they come away going, this really is the real Mount Sinai. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I've been trying to say that. And they're like, no, it really is. I'm like, no, absolutely. So the point is I just sort of let Eli observe, and people asked him a lot of questions and so forth. And look, any legitimate credentialed scholar, they're going to be very cautious. And so that's what I expect Eli to be. It was on the second tour that he came back, again, advertising it on Facebook and everything, which says a lot. And one of our guests asked Eli, they said, are you 100% convinced that this is the real Mount Sinai? Now, to be clear, Eli is a secular Israeli biblical archaeologist, which is, he's not an evangelical Bible-believing Christian. His faith would probably be pretty typical of most Israelis as far as that goes. But his answer was very interesting. He said, Joel is 100% convinced. And he said, but I think it is the best candidate of all of the various Mount Sinai candidates. This is the best candidate. Now, that's saying a lot, again, for someone who's very cautious, who is a respectable, credentialed his reputation means a lot for him to say this is the best of all the candidates. Now, here's a very, and let me just add this. There are several other biblical archaeologists that I am aware of, I won't say all of their names, from Israel and abroad who are connected with Saudi Arabia or Israel, who absolutely wholeheartedly believe that this is the real Mount Sinai. Steve Rudd, for instance, was in the film Patterns of Evidence. He works up there at Shiloh in Samaria in Israel. A really amazing place if you've never been there. And there were a handful of other scholars that were cited by Tim Mahoney. So the notion that it's rejected across the boards or that, Jebel al-Lawz is rejected by mainstream scholars, it's really just not true. So the primary, I'm going to say, beginning point, why do you believe it's the real Mount Sinai? Well, very simply, because it's in the land of Midian. So this really becomes the basis for believing it in the first place, and really overwhelming biblical, archaeological, scholarly, academic consensus says that the ancient land of Midian, where Moses lived, is over there in northwest Saudi Arabia. So once you begin there, and again, we can debate that. The Midianites were nomadic people throughout the biblical narrative. They pop up in different places. But at that time of the Exodus, at the time of the life of Moses, all evidence points to the fact that they were there on the eastern side of the Gulf of Aqaba in what is today northwest Saudi Arabia, that was the ancient homeland of the Midianites. In fact, there's very solid evidence that it was two cities in particular, cities today or towns. One is called Magna, the other is called Al-Bid. And these are listed by the Roman historian Claudius Ptolemy, who is known as the father of modern geography. He actually marks those two cities, again, in the northwest province of Saudi Arabia, as being the capitals of Midian. Now, that was in the 1st century. Okay, so you begin there. The land of Midian is Saudi Arabia. Well, in the 1st century, and this is so important, in the 1st century, during the time of Jesus and the apostles, both Josephus, Flavius Josephus, the Jewish historian who went over to the Romans, again, he gets a lot of things wrong. I want to be clear. People say, well, you have to be careful. Some of his stuff was partisan. But this has nothing to do with his partisanship. This is just simple Jewish history. He makes the statement that Mount Sinai is the tallest mountain in the land of Midian. We start there. Second, he described the sea crossing. The sea crossing, he described it in very specific detail as being surrounded by very, very tall mountains. That doesn't work with the Suez Canal. That only works with the Gulf of Aqaba on the eastern side of the Sinai Peninsula. So you really have two statements within Josephus to see what was the common Jewish belief during the 1st century, during the time of Jesus. And he says that Mount Sinai is the tallest and most sacred mountain in the land of Midian. Likewise, Philo, so Josephus was in the latter part of the 1st century in Jerusalem. Philo was a Jewish philosopher, theologian who was over there in Egypt, in Alexandria, and he was alive around the time of Jesus. He also makes the same statement that Mount Sinai is the tallest and most sacred mountain in the land of Midian, in that area where Jethro lived and so forth. So you have two Jewish witnesses from the 1st century. You also have the references of Claudius Ptolemy, and you also even have some references in the Septuagint, some variations in the way that words are translated. The point is this: you have 3 or arguably 4 very solid witnesses from the 1st century, from the time of Jesus, from the time of Paul, the time of the apostles, that says that Jewish tradition held that Jebel al-Lawz in Saudi Arabia is the real Mount Sinai. So you have to begin there. And I've made this point many, many times. I've yet to see any of the scholars, any of the academics who are critics, who are naysayers of Jebel al-Lawz as the real Mount Sinai, I've yet to see any of them really deal with this reality, that the 1st century Jewish tradition, that the Jews of the 1st century clearly believed that Jebel al-Lawz was the real Mount Sinai. They never begin there. And that's a huge, huge issue. From there, then we begin looking at the evidence. We say, does all the evidence line up? And you go, yes, geologically, topographically, geographically, in terms of archaeology, in terms of petroglyphs, like on and on and on in every arena. It all lines up. Now, I'm just going to end by just flashing up a little picture. It was interesting. I think people will be really interested. We were there at the mural of all of the cows, and I pointed out a particular marking that I do believe certainly resembles and looks an awful lot like a Proto-Cainitic Hebrew Aleph. Okay, now I'm always very careful because I'm not a scholar and I don't pretend to be. But, you know, I have eyeballs and I can look at this and say, yeah, this looks exactly like a very early Proto-Cainitic Hebrew Aleph. And I pointed it out to Ellie, and he jumped up and he goes, that is a Hebrew Aleph. He goes, I need to look into it a little bit more to be careful. You know, he always has to sort of qualify it. But we stood up there and he was happy to pose and take a picture with it. And so, again, this is really just one more bit of evidence that those who made these petroglyphs were, in fact, the ancient Hebrews. To me, it's all very exciting. So, again, guys, we've got 2 tours coming up, October 5th through the 11th, and then next April, April 9th through the 16th, and that will include an extension wherein we go up into Jordan. We explore some of the latter parts of the itinerary of the Exodus. So really exciting stuff. Again, if you're interested, go to livingpassages.com, and I really do hope to see you all sometime in Saudi Arabia. So God bless, have a great day, and Maranatha.